Welcome to the HIT Podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we're dropping into your feed on Tuesdays with what I hope are bite-sized, fun, digestible, but really good, interesting conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be absolutely no exception. I'm super excited. I've known our guest for a long time, seen her speak multiple times. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to bring on Marilyn Monahan. Marilyn, how are you?
I'm doing great today. So thank you very much for having me. And it's a pleasure working with you on this.
Yeah, totally. It's been fun over the years to either speak on panels together or if not sharing a stage, I'll be up next, you're up now. And you've just done so much in the community, specifically in the Southern California area and the human resources arena, all the PIRAs of the world and all the places you've spoken. But if you don't mind, can you just give us a quick kind of overview of who's Marilyn and how did you get in the chair today?
Well, it's always great to collaborate with you, Evan. That's always been a lot
Thank
of
you.
fun, and it's more interesting than when I'm doing things just on my own. But I am an employee benefits lawyer, and I specialize in compliance issues that employers face and agents face with regard to the federal employee benefit laws, as well as state insurance laws. So that's things like the Affordable Care Act, ERISA, HIPAA, COBRA, and related Internal Revenue Code provisions.
I feel like there's gosh, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 different laws that apply to employee benefits at least, right? I mean, maybe 12?
At least, yeah, at least. And then there's a lot of them that, don't directly address, but then touch on the space. So that's why I get so involved in human resource
Yeah,
associations, not only because human resource people have to worry about benefits and have to know their compliance obligations with regard to benefits, but also there's crossover issues like FMLA.
right, right. Yeah, no, that gets hairy. And then, are we talking about their disability insurance? And so now you've got HR involved. God forbid there's some workers' comp thing going on and it mixes in and or, the person have a disability or something. It gets hairy quick.
It really does. There's a lot of crossover, so you really need a team to help you work your way through it all.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you being on here, and I appreciate what a wonderful resource you've been to not only us, our clients, and honestly the community in general for quite a long time. And as we get into kind of your expertise, one of the things I wanted to do, and part of the reason I want to have you on is, for some of us, March 23rd, 2010 was the day the world changed. And if you're not necessarily aware of that date off the top of your head, that is the day that you pick your name, the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, the ACA, the Obamacare, the PPACA, the legislation passed. And so it's coming up on its 15-year birthday, Marilyn. It can almost get a learner's permit. It can drive.
Isn't that amazing? It's a teenager. It's going through all the stresses and the opportunities that teenagers go through. And it
Yeah, well,
affects
kind of.
everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a colicky baby, but it's good now. Well, I love the opportunity to have you on and to talk about some of this stuff. And I think, maybe if we can just, dive right into it. With respect to laws that pertain to employers and their benefits, and potentially even specifically, the healthcare reform legislation, I'm curious to kind of pick your brain on some of the things that you still see, 15 years later into the Affordable Care Act's life cycle, or even just in general. What are some of the big ones that trip up employers still?
I still get questions always this time of year when the 1094, 1095 forms are almost due.
Yeah.
What is an ALE? What is an applicable large employer? Am I one? And what does that mean? Get that question every year. And then what are the deadlines for the forms? What are the codes for the forms? How do control groups work? All those kinds of questions. So they keep popping up.
They do. And actually, God bless you for the segue, because we've done an episode on what makes an ALE. And we've done an episode on the 1094, 1095 forms, including specifically, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I find on the 1095 lines, kind of 14, 15, and 16 are the tricky ones, the 1 series codes, the 2 series codes. Like, what do you put as an employer into those spaces tends to be one that trips people up. So we actually did a full episode on that, which was nice.
Those definitely trip employers up. And do they have to fill in both line 14 and 16?
Yep.
And what codes do they put in and how do they all work? But another one that trips a lot of employers up is the 1094C form,
Mm-hmm.
the transmittal form. A
Yep.
lot of employers don't understand what the various columns are asking for, and they'll fill them out incorrectly, or their payroll provider will fill them out correctly, and they don't understand them well enough to ask the payroll provider questions. And sometimes if they fill them out wrong, whether it's the lines 14 and 16 or the 1094C, that's what generates a 226J letter from the IRS saying, we think you owe a penalty.
Yeah, and I
So,
think many HR people actually check under their beds at night before they go to sleep for a 22J letter. It's just it's the boogeyman, you know.
it
And
really
I'm,
is.
I'm I'm actually curious to dive down that rabbit hole with you to say like, okay, so we're talking a little bit about what trips employers up, but what like are you seeing consequence to this, right? Are you seeing letters sent out?
Yes. So since this all started, we've been seeing letters come out. Now, interestingly, I haven't seen so many this year. It seems to have slowed down a little bit. There was a whole lot last year. So we'll see what happens, but it's always a possibility. And a lot of times it's not because the employer didn't offer the right coverage to the right people. It's because they filled the forms out incorrectly.
Yeah,
But
it's
then you
amazing
have to
how checking the wrong box is such an issue.
It really is an issue. Yeah. It matters. It makes a difference.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the payroll vendor. I'm curious to see, is that who, in your experience, is what most employers lean on with respect to, I guess, like a vehicle or a partner to fill these forms in?
I think most often because they have the data. There's a lot of different routes employers can take. They can use their payroll vendor. They can do it themselves with software. They can use a third-party vendor. Um, Now that some employers fill them out mechanically, but now that everyone has to file electronically, I think that's almost disappeared or will disappear.
Is that
But I
everyone?
do.
Because I thought there was a 250 limit. Did that go up and or change?
So that changed. The 250 limit no longer applies.
Hmm.
Now, if you file 10 or more 1095Cs, W-2s, and 1099s, which is all applicable large employers,
Right.
you have to file electronically. So
Interesting.
for
Okay.
most employers, that means hiring a vendor to do it. They
Yeah.
can do it on their own, but I think realistically, most employers end up hiring someone to help them, at least with the filing process.
No, I agree. I've doing it on your own is silly good stuff. I've never really seen anyone try that. But okay, so while we're on the thread of the 1094 or 1095s, and we're talking a little bit about kind of who has to do it, and the fact that you have to do it electronically. When you used to do it manually or electronically, there's a difference in due dates, which reminds me to talk to you a little bit about due dates, and I actually would like to unpack not only federal, but an understanding of, like, for example, California maybe having different timelines as well. So can you talk to me about the timeline on filing all these things?
Well, you kind of have at both the federal and the state level, you have two deadlines. You have the deadline to furnish the forms to employees, and you have the deadline to file with the government. So at the federal level, to furnish to employees, the technical deadline is January 31, but a couple of years ago, the IRS gave everyone an automatic 30-day extension to March 2nd, which this year is March 3rd because March 2nd falls on a weekend. Um, the deadline to file electronically is March 31st. You can't get any additional time to furnish to employees. They won't give you an extension. You can request an extension of time to file with the IRS, but you have to file a form on or before March 31st to get that short extension. So if they're done to furnish to the employees, they should be ready to go to the IRS.
So
That's
realistically, whenever people Google this stuff and it says March or end of March, it's kind of January 31st, frankly.
It kind of is. Or this year, March 3rd, I
Right,
think
right,
is,
right, right, right.
yeah.
Because of the weekend thing. But even still, that January 31st date to furnish to employees, that they need to have their, ducks in a row by that date.
Absolutely. They need to start working on this as soon as the year starts and make certain that they're ready to go by that deadline. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked a little bit about like
Can
determining
I can I
ALEs. Oh, please go ahead. Yeah.
can I add a point to that?
Please. Yeah,
If
yeah.
they get them done by January 31 and they have to mail them out, they can put them in the same envelope as the W-2. So
Yeah.
that is an additional incentive to get them done by January 31. You only have one mailing.
Right, right. And are you seeing that that's something payroll vendors offer then is they'll just double stuff the envelope sort of thing?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good point. Thank you for that. So yeah, moving from like we talked about, who's an ALE or applicable large employer if we haven't unpacked that one yet, and kind of the main forms that you have to fill out. Obviously, with the 1095C form, there is also the 1095B, which almost always the carriers will issue, unless there's this weird world where you're self-insured but not large enough as an applicable large employer. Otherwise, employers just use Section 3 on the 1095C to sufficiently tell the IRS, hey, we basically did our requirements as the insurer in a self-funded space. Is that, am I humming the right tune?
That's exactly right. So if you are an ALE, and you must file the C series forms. The insurance company files the B series forms, which tells the IRS exactly who enrolled in the coverage. If you are under 50 and you self-fund, so you have a level funded plan, there's no insurance company to provide the B series forms. So you have to file. Normally, a small employer doesn't have to file the forms, the one exception being if you're under 50 and you self-fund, and then they have you use the B series forms.
And you touched on something that's an interesting nuance there that I want to unpack. You bounce between self-funded and level funded. I think the important note in there is if an employer maybe didn't know, in a world where you're kind of either pregnant or not pregnant, these level funded plans, I know you're paying a flat fixed premium and it might feel like a fully insured product, but they are built on a self-funded chassis. So thank you for touching upon level funded as we unpack guys that need to do the B series forms.
That is one of those questions I get every year. I have a level funded plan. Well, then you have a self-funded plan and you have a few more compliance obligations you might not be recognizing.
Yeah. Talk to me about PCORI fees. Speaking of self-funded stuff that is tied up in the healthcare reform bill that they might maybe trips people up. Is that something that you see people struggling with, or that goes pretty smooth in your experience?
I don't get as many questions on PCORI fees as I used to. But people still forget about them. I still get maybe 1 or 2 or 3 calls every year.
Yeah.
I forgot to file my PCORI fees. What do I do? If you are a self-funded, if you're an employer with a self-funded plan, you have to pay those PCORI fees every year by July 31 and file with the IRS the Form 720.
Yeah.
So make sure to add that to your calendar.
What if they forgot? So you said I sometimes field questions where people say, hey, Marilyn, I forgot. Do you tell them the same thing that you can say here, or?
They can check with their tax counsel. They can check with their employee benefits counsel. The general advice I would say is take care of it. Make sure it gets done.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the process and so forth, you can talk to counsel about that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So PCORI, not as big of a trip up. We talked a little bit about 1095s being a trip up, ALEs, and we've got some answers to that. Are there other things either within the PPACA space or just, employee benefits in general that you're still seeing? Even my seasoned HR folks, Toby, while you have me on air, I'd like to unpack, this or that.
Well, there's 2 things I want to mention. One is you alluded to earlier the 1094, 1095 forms and state filing requirements.
I did.
Don't forget that if you are in California and you have a self-funded plan, you have to file those 1094, 1095 forms not only with the IRS, but also with the Franchise Tax Board. And there's deadlines to do that as well. I believe it's May 31 this year. So that's one thing that I think trips up a lot of employers. They're not thinking about that. They're not thinking about
great note. Thank you. That's exactly the type of stuff I was trying to have on today's podcast.
The other one I'll mention is an oldie but a goodie, and that is not having wrap documents. And there's a couple of reasons that you need wrap documents, but one is to add those terms that aren't in the insurance company's policy.
And maybe before you go too far, you're talking about the ERISA wrap document, and that comes way before the healthcare reform bill, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, ERISA just turned 50 years old last year. So it's in middle age. So it's well established, but we still find employers who don't know about the wrap documents. So you're right. It is an ERISA requirement. And the reason it becomes a requirement is ERISA says you have to include certain information in your plan document and your summary plan description. And the carrier's documents will satisfy like 95% of that, but there's still some segments like eligibility terms and waiting periods that the carriers won't fully address in their documents.
And for
And so
clarity,
you have
this is not self-funded only. This is everybody, right?
exactly. This is fully
Regardless of
insured.
size, even.
Yeah, all sizes and self-funded or fully insured. The wraps are pretty essential.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's something that, we as a firm do for our clients. And we provide that wrap document, as you said, sort of gathers the rest of the documents created by the other vendors in the ecosystem and fills out the blanks. But if a client is listening and does not have, insurance consultant that does this, this is another thing that maybe you do, or they reach out to counsel, or where do folks turn if they don't believe that they're getting assistance on their ERISA wrap or they don't have one?
Well, as you said, sometimes brokers assist with this process. There are vendors, third-party TPAs who will provide these documents, or they can go to a benefits lawyer like me to
Yeah.
get them. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. The
But
oldie but a goodie there. Oh, please go ahead.
well, as long as we're talking about documentation, let's also mention that a lot of people don't have a written document for their cafeteria plan, which is separate from the wrap document, but it is required by IRS rules.
The
So if
125 or the pop or?
the 125 plan, so which is called a 125 plan because it's authorized by Section 125 of the Internal Revenue Code.
Right.
So if you allow your employees to pay for their benefits pre-tax, a POP plan, you need a written plan document that outlines the terms and conditions. And a
So
lot of
POP
employers
meaning
don't
premium
have.
only plan. And that again is this sort of, like you said, ability to pre-tax. Now, let me ask you this question because I get on this with some clients where they say, hey, I'd like to issue this exception or that exception. And they kind of, and I know everyone shakes their head and go, hey, listen, you're setting precedent. But also, am I right in my understanding that you could potentially jeopardize the entire plan's ability to pre-tax at some point if you're in violation of this stuff?
That's a very good point. That's absolutely true. So the way the IRS regulations are written are, if you have a cafeteria plan, you have to follow the following rules, including having a written plan document, having elections before the start of the plan year, not allowing people to make mid-year election changes unless they have a qualifying status change, and that status change is defined in the written plan document. And
Marriage, divorce,
several
birth
other
of a
things.
baby, spouse loses their job, court order, those things, right?
Those kinds of things. Those are qualifying status changes. And the IRS has said that if you don't follow the rules, they could take away the tax benefits that are otherwise available to everyone in the plan. And so you don't want that to happen. So that is a big incentive to follow the rules.
Yeah, and that's kind of the cover I try to give to, my HR clients where they go, look, I know the employee is telling you, oh man, I forgot or I didn't read it close enough, or I've got this, kind of ticky-tack reason, and they're coming to us going, what do you think? So I go, listen, ultimately, good HR is about managing the letter of the law and also the culture, and you guys need to figure out when you give exceptions, broadly speaking. That being said, in this world, in this arena, I'd be very thoughtful about exceptions, and you can lean on the IRS and say, look, it's not me in HR. I'm not the one saying, I don't want you to be able to change your plan. We can lose the ability to pre-tax for everybody. And can you imagine being the HR person that blew up a plan to where now you work for a company that can't pre-tax their benefits because we no good deed goes unpunished sort of thing?
I'll give you two other reasons. We've talked about the IRS, but also, related to that are the wrap documents and your ERISA plan documents. And ERISA says that the people who administer the plan are fiduciaries, and it is a fiduciary obligation to administer the plan according to plan terms. So that's another reason. You can blame the IRS and IRS regulations, but you can also blame your fiduciary responsibilities if you
Yeah.
want to put it in those terms. I have to follow the rules.
Yep.
This is legally mandated, and I need to follow the rules. And I can't make an exception for you and not make it for the person down the hall. So these are the rules that we're going to have to follow.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that fiduciary responsibility, because to be frank, I've seen a lot more noise surrounding that and surrounding like HR or the CFO or even the CEOs of companies that at some point were like, man, I guess my benefits guy's doing this or whatever. But the I guess requisite diligence surrounding everything from the pharmacy benefits to the strength of the plan to performances. Can you give me 2 cents on that?
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Baked into ERISA is the obligation of the people administering the plan. And I won't, for the purposes of this conversation, define who exactly qualifies as a fiduciary. But if you are a fiduciary, you have to satisfy the ERISA fiduciary rules, like
Does
the
it rhyme with Schmate Schmar, or can you give us a hint?
So that's, for example, the fiduciary rules are operating the plan for the exclusive benefit of participants and beneficiaries, satisfying the prudent person standard. But one of them is also administering the plan according to plan terms.
Right.
And you said you've heard a lot more chatter about this. There is an increase in litigation involving breach of fiduciary duties, where specifically they're focusing a lot on PBMs, as you mentioned,
Pharmacy benefit managers, yeah.
pharmacy benefit managers, and what plans are paying toward pharmacy benefits, as well as what they're paying their service providers and whether they're properly monitoring and choosing their service providers. This is getting a lot more attention from plaintiffs and plaintiffs' attorneys, and that means that plans are paying more attention, and they're making certain that they understand their obligations, they're following their obligations, and they're documenting their obligations.
Yep.
And can I add one more point there? A little while ago, I alluded to the fact that I was going to give you 2 reasons to follow the cafeteria plan rules and administer the plan according to plan terms. Another one I was reminded of when you were talking about the CFO and the CEO is mergers and acquisitions.
Mm.
Even if you don't get audited by the government, another situation that can up is your company could be sold. And the due diligence lawyers come in and they start looking through your records. And if they see issues where you haven't filed your Form 5500, you haven't paid your PCORI fees, you haven't been properly administering your plan, that can become an issue in the transaction. And you don't want that to happen.
Those due dilly boys, they'll get you.
They will.
This has been absolutely lovely. And I every time I have a just the best conversations, they fly by, and I glance at the clock and I go, my goodness, I have my commitment to the audience to sticking to these bite-sized and digestible. So like a good magician, we leave you wanting more. But Marilyn, I just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for celebrating the 15th birthday of the Affordable Care Act with me here today.
It's been my pleasure. So happy birthday to the ACA.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for you this week on the show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet. We want to get out with thank yous to our sponsors, TrueHue and Excel Health.